IMT Conversations with Rhod, Tecson. An incisive and sharp discussion of today's current issues. Ang pagpadayon sa duwa ka dekada nga serbisyo publiko. IMT Conversations with Rhod, Tecson.
Maayong hapon, syudad kag probinsya sang Iloilo kag sa tanan nga nagatanaw sa amon live via Facebook page Iloilo Metropolitan Times. My name is Elyrose Naorbe, ang temporaryo nagatalo sa inyo na angdan nga si Rhod Tecson, and welcome to IMT Conversations. Kaupod naton live subong nga hapon si Captain Garin Evidente, Executive Assistant to the CEO, concurrently Training Director of Lacson Foundation Training Center, para pagaistoryahan ang status ng maritime industry diri sa aton sa Iloilo na hanungod sa isyu sang European Union nga nagasiling nga at least 50,000 Filipino seafarers may lose their jobs if the Philippines remains non-compliant with the International Convention on Standards of Training, Certification, and Watchkeeping for Seafarers or ang ginatawag nga STCW Convention. Sir, maayong hapon kag salamat sa imo tiyempo nga ginhatag diri sa amon sa Iloilo Metropolitan Times.
Maayong hapon, Elyrose, kag sa inyong viewers, kag tagpalamati. Good afternoon, everyone.
So thank you, sir. So sir, first question para mabalaan naton ining issue nga ini pwede kami ka pa-explain kung ano ang ginatawag nga Convention on Standards of Training, Certification, and Watchkeeping for Seafarers.
Yeah, okay. Just to differentiate, one is the convention. The convention is more or less an international treaty, and the Philippines is a signatory to that, just like many other maritime countries. And that particular convention is also in the form of standards.
Yes.
So kung tawag natin yung standards, then it is the STCW code. Kung convention, then it is the STCW convention, but both are the same actually. So compliance is a requirement for all of those who are signatories. So the Philippines is a signatory, kumbaga.
Okay, sir, So, sir, ang sa ginasiling diri sang EU, nga we might lose 50,000 Filipino seafarers, diri sa aton sa Iloilo, specifically dira sa inyo sa Lacson, affected kita sini sa amoning issue, sir?
Yes, of course. Primarily, kami as an educational institution, we are one of those nga naga-produce sang seafarers. But primarily, ang mauna gid nga maapektuhan sini is ang those who are already on board European flag ships. Meaning to say, mga barko dito sa Europe nga registered sa European Union or members of the European Union. So kung European ships lang ang pag-istoryahan, there are about 50, or to be exact, actually, it's 46,000 Filipino officers or seafarers on European vessels. And that is a big part of the world fleet, kumbaga. Pero kung EU kag EMSA lang ang istoryahan naton, that is around just under 50,000 seafarers ang maapektuhan. Now, for compliance, the issue has been with us since 2006. This was when we first got audited by EMSA, for that matter. EMSA is the European Maritime Safety Agency, who is the arm that is checking on the compliance of the different countries who are providing seafarers to the European Union. And gimbisitahan kita sa 2006, as a matter of fact, John B. was one of those that was audited by EMSA in 2006. They found nothing wrong with John B., for example. But basically, they do not audit the individual schools. They audit the Philippines. So, kumbaga, the results cover in scope all of the Philippines, not just a particular school.
Okay,
In 2006, and there were findings. Unfortunately, nakalabot lang sa dason nila nga visit sang 2013, wala ma-rectify or wala ma-improve ang situation. So there was neglect both on the part of government and, of course, also on the mining industry to push for it. There was neglect to comply. And ironically, sang 2010 nag-convene ang International Maritime Convention sang ilang amendment conference diri sa Philippines. So we even have what we call the 2010 Manila Amendments to FTCW because it was held here in Manila in 2010. That's how important we are to the IMO. But again, sad to say, na nagbalik sila sa 2013, wala ma-rectify. Dito kag nagdali-dali ang Philippine government sang pag-enact sang what we call the Republic Act 10635 governing the training and the manning industry for the Philippines. Republic Act na siya. And nagkaroon ng turf war between CHED and between Marina. But then, kaya nagpagwa kita sa Republic Act 10635 because Marina was being appointed as the single administration agency that will be responsible for reporting everything to the IMO. So 2013, 2014, Again, EMSA came back again for another audit in 2018. And among the findings nila, ara ang recurring na mga findings daw amo lang gyapon. And of course that started the alarm bells ringing nga dugay na kamo ginambalan amo ning kulang amo ning diferensya i-rectify nyo and all and it seems that recurring ang problem. So 2018 na. And sad to say the government has what we call given answers through Marina and of course with the assistance also even from CHED and the other agencies. Nagpadala sila sa reply sa EMSA. And apparently EMSA was not satisfied. So again, they came back in 2020, just before the pandemic. And ara gyapon, may problema gyapon. And this is the reason why nga in the past weeks, medyo na-alarm na si President BBM. Nga sila niya, my goodness, dugay na ni gali, wala man ma-rectify. So why don't you get your acts together? So sa cabinet meeting, there were instructions given to the agencies involved, especially to the inclusive of the Department of for Migrant Workers, DOTR, which handles Marina, by the way, CHED, and others. Now, the deadline is supposed to be that we are supposed to give an answer, which EMSA is going to study kung okay na ang answer natin, ang corrective answer natin nga ginhatag sa April. And we are awaiting their final decision or the results of the final evaluation of the answers that we gave them last April. I will not be judgmental, but it is really quite sad to say that medyo questionable pa atong mga answers or responses na ginpadala naton sa April. Now here comes another requirement. The requirement of the International Maritime Organization is that all maritime countries have to submit to an independent evaluation every 5 years. Lain na ni siya, hindi na ni siya EMSA or European Union. Kuha na ni siya IMO, which is the UN body, the International Maritime Organization. So we submitted ourselves to an independent evaluation. And sad to say, very similar ang findings sa independent evaluation to the findings of EMSA last 2020. So, bina-affirm nila more or less ang naging findings ni EMSA. So, that is quite alarming because in the case of EU, you will be jeopardizing the jobs of 50,000 seafarers, so to speak. Dili naman niya sa IMO, sa independent evaluation, you are jeopardizing the whitelisting of the Philippines as a compliant country. So meaning to say, we may or we may not be included in the forthcoming whitelist that will be produced or promulgated by the International Maritime Organization in the near future. So if you are not in the white list, meaning to say, markado na kumbaga ang mga Filipino seafarers, not only in Europe, but it is going to be worldwide.
Okay.
Now, it's not going to be very immediate. That's the big concern. For example, in the EU, supposing if the Philippines is not compliant, hindi bang kaagad-agad lang ang matabo, nga madulaan, obrahan 50,000 ka seafarers. Those who are serving and they have valid what we call certificates of competencies should be able to, let's say, may transition period. And I think the maximum for the transition period, if I'm not mistaken, is 5 years. So, hindi naman agad-agad. And there will be other measures, countermeasures, not possible in order to avert what we call the very serious impact on the livelihood of 50,000 seafarers. There are certain measures that could be done by the European countries themselves. Let me explain that.
Yes, sir.
Ang European countries kasi, to be honest, they want to have Filipino seafarers. Almost all of them. And they cannot just simply say na, hindi na kita mag-hire Filipino. They cannot do that, honestly speaking. Where are they going to get the 46 or 50,000 to replace the needed seafarers for their European ships? Secondly, at this moment in time, natabo na isang una, there was what we call skepticism. Ano gid bala ang rason nga ang ginahingabot nyo ginang Filipino seafarers? So we even asked them, the Philippines even asked them in Europe, do you have statistics as to how the safety on European ships has been affected because of the so-called findings that you have for the Philippines? So wala man sila sa research study that will say nga, ay kung Pilipino ang imo nga mga crew or ang officers mo, prone to accidents, prone to disasters at sea ang inyong fleet. They do not have statistics. And also, what very many do not know is that we have what we call the Baltic International Maritime Council that comes out with a report. This is related to shipping worldwide, BIMCO as we call it. Now, the latest BIMCO manpower report issued in 2021, the Philippines is still number one supplier of seafarers for European ships, European flag vessels. Number 2 is Russia. Number 3, mind you, is Ukraine. So you can just imagine, I don't know the exact figure, but a big percentage of Ukrainian sailors or seafarers cannot sail or are not sailing on ships right now. So, na-aggravate ang shortage of seafarers on European ships. So, how can you do away with Filipinos at a time when the number 3 supplier in Europe is also even lacking, is not forthcoming? So they will only triple their problem in Europe if they do away with Filipino seafarers, especially at this time. So there are several other varied, as I've said, I don't want to be judgmental, but I have my own personal observations on this over several years and over several trips to Europe, especially to those European countries involved. They are investing very heavily. They are heavily backed and supported by their governments and by the European Union itself. Kitaya sa Pilipinas, maritime schools do not get any support from government. Regulatory functions, yes. Regulated situation, yes. But as to support, or maybe what you would call maybe a subsidy, nothing. Whereas in other countries, it's all the government's support that they are relying on. Dili iya wala. Sad to say. So, for sustainability, the schools also need to survive in order to be able to produce the seafarers. But true enough, the intake has to have quality. But not to the point na ang school hindi na makasurvive. How can you have a very high standard, high quality school, but it cannot survive? So there has to be sustainability in that. This is where the government should come in. Yun lang ang masasabi ko for now.
So sir, no, as what you have mentioned earlier, no, dugay na siya nga tinuig, no, nga hatagan kita sang baltagan palugit na sang mga requirements nga dapat naton i-comply, no. So sa imo ya sir personal, sir, no, what made you think ano ang mga delays, no, nga sa parts ng aton government may lack bala ang government sa support nga hasta subong hindi ni naton mapasar ang ginatawag naton nga STCW?
Well, as I've said, I don't want to be the person to say to be pointing fingers or to be pointing the blame here and there. But what is obvious is, for example, in the past 8 years lang we had how many marina administrators appointed? How many OIC marina administrators did we have? We had several over just the past 8 years. And then in Marina itself, you have the executive director's office in charge of STCW. The same thing, they have had several appointees over the past several years. So with that very fast turnover, it will be very difficult to implement improvements and changes and rectifications unless very rigid ang roadmap. And when I say it is a rigid roadmap, it is a roadmap that should have been what we call formulated with and by people who are in the know. So the matter is, if the people who are creating a roadmap are not the people who are in the know with regards the merchant shipping profession, then medyo may learning curve pa inadira. And that's the reason why nga daw nagadrag siya. Kasi agad nag-trial and error pa kita even when trying to give answers to the findings or the grievances of EMSA. Nag-trial and error pa kita. Gahatag kita sang sabat nga hindi kita siguro sang atong answer. So there has to be that resolve to get the government agencies and all the other agencies involved together. Make it a concerted effort na gidlang. Not a turf war that has always been happening.
Sir, no, so with all the findings, no, so sa mga previous years na to, no, specifically, sir, no, sa ato niya, sir, no, diin kita nga areas non-compliant.
Okay. Ang isa sa mga persistent nato nga non-compliance is lack of supervision and monitoring. That has been there from the very start. Meaning to say, when you implement maritime education and training, you should be consistently, persistently monitoring it and supervising it. So that has been a persistent non-compliance on our part. The other one is when we implement what we call standards. When we implement standards, we have been lacking on the fact that as I've said earlier, nga kung wala mo ginasuportahan ng isa ka eskwelahan, hindi mo man siya basta-basta na lang ipasira. Okay?
Yes.
And you have what we call an obligation as well to give education, access to education to everyone. Karon kay mabatal na programa ang maritime, dason manira kay mo yung maritime school, you know, what are you going to give in exchange? We have to consider something. The Philippines is very, very much taking advantage of billions, hundreds of billions of pesos every year from seafarers alone. From seafarers alone. Mga 400 billion pesos in 1 year. So the government should be able to, you know, create a fund that should be able to support an industry such as that, because the returns, the socio-economic impact of that is very, very critical to the economic status of every community, especially daan ta lang ka example, isa ka barangay,
Yes.
Kung may duha ka senior officers nga sa amuna nga barangay or sitio nga amuna sa isa ka remote nga banwa. Imagine they earning anything from $5,000 to $10,000 a month, each one of them. Duha sila. You can imagine the socio-economic impact to that particular family, to that particular community. So those are things that the government should consider and of course support in a way.
Oo. So sir, no, basic question, no, why can't we comply correctly, sir, sa amoning issue, sir, or sa mga requirements naton?
Well, as I've said earlier, I don't want to be pointing fingers, but as I've said, we have to get our acts together. So, daw pare, bala na gina-investigar ka, pero antes ka nagsapat sa investigasyon, wala ka anay nag-research, wala ka na namangkot-mangkot sa iban, wala ka na mangkotanon kag nag-meeting sa imo nga mga stakeholders across all those involved, or all those who are what we call affected, and all those who are what we call participating and collaborating on this. Dapat king konsulta mo anay antes ka naghatag sang sabat dito, or antes ka nag-create sang isa ka strategy. Dapat may consensus gid anay sang tanan nga magiging epektibo siya. So far daw dira may kakulangan gid.
So sir, no, ano ang role, sir, no, sang CHED, no, or Commission on Higher Education sa amoning issue, kay siling nila hindi inisala sang Marina, no, but sa CHED ni siya nga part?
Not necessarily. As I mentioned earlier, Republic Act 10635 has made Marina as the overseeing authority over the maritime education and training, not CHED. It is not. It has been removed from CHED by virtue of Republic Act 10635, and which was strengthened by Executive Order 63. So, meaning to say, may say na gidya ang Marina, and instead of playing first fiddle, nag-second fiddle na lang si CHED. So, kumbaga, supportive role na lang si CHED in implementing STCW for Philippine Maritime Education and Training. So, ara gidya gyapon sa Marina, kag-ara na gid sa Marina. Now, again, as I've said, they have to get their acts together, together with the other agencies involved. So, hindi lang na dayon sa siling takay tertiary education. So that's why CHED is involved. Kung hindi na siya baccalaureate degree, then CHED would not be involved. Definitely. See? So, kung isipon mo bala, anong tanabi kay baccalaureate degree na siya. So it has to be under CHED in the implementation of the curriculum. But it is still under Marina in terms of implementing STCW in the Philippines.
So sir, no, with this issue, no, ang baltagani kagina damo-damo ng mga requirements nga gina-send sa ato, no, but then again, no, gina-neglect lang siya, no, sang mga related agencies, and as general siguro sa aton nga national government, no. So can we point this issue, no, nga may corruption siya, or shall we say Marina is not knowledgeable enough to manage this problem?
In the first place kasi, inadequate pagidman niya ang sang Marina. Although the learning curve has been improving, I must say that, pero may inadequacy pagidman niya ang Marina Imagine, Marina is also, of course, over and above the safety of the running of the ships all over the country. Dira na lang adaan tanawa ang safety record naton sa mga barko. That's also under Marina. Safety equipment is under Marina and the Philippine Coast Guard. So, many agencies are interrelated when it comes to that. And then all of a sudden, you make Marina in charge of education and training. So, then a transition has to happen. Kagamay na agency ang Marina as compared to CHED, for example. Its personnel, they have to build up its organization to be able to cope with the responsibilities that they have. Included in that, as I've said, na dapat in the know ang mga tao nga ibutang nila, kabalo kag kaintindi, hindi kay naka-eskwela lang kamay nga related sa maritime ay pwede na maka-dirigir o maka-supervise or mangin department head or whatever. Dapat medyo immersed din sa shipping in order to be able to perceive what is required sa standards, sa competency standards and all that.
Okay. So sir, no, sa nasiling mo gani no, hindi tanan no mga officials dira sa marina no knowledgeable on this kind of or this certain issue no. So ang question is hindi naton ini ma-solve no nga hatagan bisang or i-appoint naton no ang mga personnel or officials nga knowledgeable nga makahandle kag probably ma-solve na ni nga issue no sa aton nga issue diri sa aton nga ginatawag nga threat no or lack sang mga training sa aton nga mga seafarers?
Well, I think I sort of implied on that later, kaina. Counting from 2006 to the present day, that's 16 years. Never mind the 16 years, may 8 years na lang kita. Na-mention ko na kaina, kapila na kita nag-ilis Marina Administrator. May OIC Marina Administrator pag kapila na kita nag-ilis ang Executive Director for STCW. Kapila na kita nagbutang sang OIC Executive Director in the past 8 years. Almost 8 months. So imagine, how could you be changing and changing and changing? So the system has to improve from that. And pila na ka-presidente ang nag-alagi, pila na ka-appointees ang nag-alagi. And yet, ari man kita gyapon, still at the same level. So, as I've said, concerted effort na biglang tani, kag amuna, they have to be very careful with appointments from now on. Hindi kay co-terminus or for example, basta may nabalaan na nga gamay, pwede man na, makayaya na, you know. No, but there is no continuity. Wala sang sureball na roadmap, and so nang gauyat, wala man continuity. Paano yan na karon mapataguyod or ma-sustain? So unfortunately, we have to improve on that first. We have to improve on that at first. And then hopefully we will be able to get what we call a reprieve from the European Union. As I've said, may transition period man sila nga ihatag. On the part of schools and on part of other parts of training, the government should also think of setting up a fund to support, to subsidize. At least, kung kabalo sila mag-subsidize sa ibang nga industriya, sa ibang nga what we call economic naton, mga needs naton, why not this particular industry from where the country has benefited for many, many years in billions and billions of dollars every year? So, kumbaga, political issue ni siya, so to speak. Hindi kay agi-agi lang, dapat sureball lang nga roadmap.
So, sir, no, last na lang, sir, no, since nga nabalaan mo na nino ang mga in and out sila kay in charge ka man sa aton nga STCW no. So ano ang mga reminders, advice ang hatag mo no, especially sa marina, sa mga naghandle sa mga related issue nga ini para ma-solve na ini nga problem nga ini?
Well, I already mentioned, and I do not want to consider myself as an expert. It's just that I've been around for quite a number of years now, and then I've seen the transition happening. But then, as I've said, basta consultative sila dapat. Consultative across all sectors of stakeholders. Consultative. Kasi dati daw ka dictatorial, daw sa basta, muni sigurado kami correct ni. So that's it. Not knowing natin along the way may problema ina or kulang ina or hindi. So dapat consultative sila with all sectors that are involved. All the stakeholders did. That's primary. Ang consultative nila nga attitude with regards improvement. And then secondly, they should think of ways nga permanent. Hindi kay sila nga daw ka in the interim lang pirmi ang ang feeling nila, makalusot na tani, makalusot na kita. And then only to find out na hindi. You know, and you have to take the mentality of the Europeans there. Gusto nila, yan na hindi, natakaan sila eh. That's why first they called it non-compliance, they call it findings, they called it shortcomings. And lately naman, they call it with a different word, grievances. Oh, you can just imagine that. Bisan sila, libog na ulo nila how to call the findings that they see in the Philippines. So, I just hope tani lang nga muna, concerted effort lang tani sa tanan-tanan, and they should be very much on the consultative nga attitude.
So no, ato nabatian si Captain Luis Garin Evidente, ang Executive Assistant to the CEO and concurrently Training Director sang Lacson Training Center. Sir, maayong hapon kag thank you no sa pag-upod mo sa amon diri sa IMT Conversations.
Yes, thank you as well, and hoping I've been able to give some clarity. Thank you very much kag maayong hapon sa tanan.
Ayan, no? So ato nabatian no si Captain Luis Garin Evidente no sa iyagan ni ginhambal no kinahanglan sang aton nga mga personnel no sa Marina kag sa national government sang consultative no, dapat consultative sila kag dapat may collaborative efforts nga pag-aubrahon para masolbar na nin nga issue no sa iyo no. Imagine no, at least no 50,000 Filipino seafarers ang madulaan sang ubra kung sige-sige no nga hindi naton ma-comply ang ginatawag nga International Convention on Standards of Training Certification and Watchkeeping for Seafarers or STCW Convention no. So reminders no sa aton nga mga sa Marina no, especially gin point out kag ginani sir no sa Marina, especially nga tani no ang paghandle nila sang amon nga issue is masolbar na ini no kag dapat mag-create sila sang permanent na nga decision, hindi nga temporary lang no nga makalusot lang ko no, okay na no, but in the end failure man siya gyapon no. So sa nasiling man kagina no ni Captain Luis, ang ilan ni nga findings sang iyo no sa assessment, hindi ni siya individual schools but as in the whole Philippines no. So there are schools man no nga naka-comply na sila, but then sa ginpagwa nga findings in general siya Philippines no. So I hope nga sa sini nga administration no, after 18 years or 16 years nga wala kita maka-comply no sa ginatawag ni nga STCW, hopefully this administration no masolve na ini para at least trainable ang aton nga mga seafarers no kag hapos lang sila makapangita sang ubra on board. So again no, my name is Elyrose Naorbe and this is IMT Conversations on IMT News.
IMT Conversations with Rhod, Tecson. An incisive and sharp discussion of today's current issues. Ang pagpadayon sa duwa ka dekada nga serbisyo publiko. IMT Conversations with Rhod, Tecson.